Good evening, everybody. We're back with episode 2 of Spring Football Reports. I'm joined by a whole bunch of people tonight. You guys know Michael and Travis from last episode. We got a little bit of a new face here. If you're joining us for Spring Football Reports for the second time, this is Krish next to me. Krish is another one of our Shady Sports Network contributors, does a lot of indoor football stuff for us, a lot of interview type things. But anyway, what were your guys' thoughts for week 1 for the XFL season? Let's go ahead and start with Chris since you're the fresh one here.
Sure. I thought it was awesome. It was a great product. You know how I feel about the USFL, so I thought it blew the USFL out the water, honestly. Like, in terms of watching it, I had a great time watching it. I thought it was a little slow, but it's week 1. It's going to continue to get better. But I thought the quarterback play was a little rough. That's the only thing I would change. But if we can fix that, I think it's going to be a long-lasting league.
Fair enough. Michael, what were your thoughts?
I loved it. I actually thought the gameplay was pretty high quality across the board. Krish's little comment about the QB play, I think a lot of that is because the O-lines, which we'll get into a little bit later, are so much of a question mark. They're so wild because you just don't know what you're getting with them. And when you only have 5 weeks, the cohesiveness isn't always there, especially an offensive line, somebody who should play center. It's very hard to get a gel together in a short period of time. But other than that, I mean, 3 out of the 4 games were extremely competitive and really came down to last-minute plays for the most part. So I was really impressed with the overall product and production.
I would agree. Travis, what about you, man?
Yeah, I mean, my thoughts exactly. All of the games were very competitive, except for the Houston-Orlando game. On the stat sheet, didn't look as competitive, but it was still competitive for a while. And a lot of these teams are very interesting going into week 2. And I think the QB play will continue to get better, just like he said, whenever the O-line becomes more cohesive and some of these teams, start really developing their offenses, to fit their style.
Absolutely, I would agree. I think I was firmly encouraged by the product overall. Much like Michael said, I think that the games coming down to very last minute scores or big plays at the end of the game was beneficial to the XFL as a whole. I think more people are going to take notice and stick around for week 2 and beyond because they saw exciting football this past weekend. But let's go ahead and get right into our full on review. I'm going to pull up the scores here. So there are the scores from week 1. Obviously, if you caught the games, we had the Renegades beat the Vipers 22-20 in a very, very good game. And then we also had the Roughnecks beat the Guardians in a little bit more lopsided matchup. Battlehawks beat the Brahmas 18-15, and the Defenders beat the Sea Dragons 22-18. Let's go to the Defenders fans first. Let's start at the bottom here, Travis. What were your thoughts about the Defenders' comeback against Seattle this weekend?
I mean, the Defenders game is very interesting. They didn't look as polished as I thought they would. I thought they would look like one of the more polished teams and more ready teams in the league. But they struggled. They showed their struggles. We ended up playing Jordan Tiamu and De'Ara King both. And De'Ara King was very explosive whenever he got into the game, and that kind of lit the fire in us to start a bit of our comeback. And then we ended up coming all the way back to win week 1. And, I mean, what happened is exactly what I thought was going to happen in terms of whenever Ben DiNucci gets hurried and gets rushed and got pressured, he started making mistakes, and we saw him turn the ball over in very costly situations.
100%. 100%.
For me, this was the tale of 2 halves. DC came out and Reggie Barlow looked like he was being outcoached by a very prominent veteran coach on the other side. But then you got to the second half, and Greg Williams made almost every adjustment under the sun for that defense, and Ben DiNucci just absolutely demolished the entire second half. I mean, that Seattle Sea Dragons offensive line looked like it was going from being one of the best to like one of the worst in one half of football. And it was a lot of what the adjustments were for Greg Williams. So this game kind of went how I expected it to go. Like Travis said, I think the first half was a little bit rough because we expected a little bit more from the experienced team. But you can't deny Seattle's offensive genius mind with Drew Jones over there and their coaching experience over there. They just didn't make the adjustments that DC made, and it cost them the game down the stretch.
I would agree. It was definitely shocking to see the outcome. As you all know, I did not catch the back half of this game, but ultimately DC won. It looked like Seattle had it in hand at one point, but very interesting to see how the game ultimately finished up. If you're catching this right now, definitely do us a favor. Go share this on your social media with any of your friends that are spring football fans as well, because we're about to have a fantasy football expert join us to discuss all things DFS fantasy football, as well as other forms of fantasy that you definitely don't want to miss. Krish, give us your thoughts on the Renegades and Vipers game, which I know you were a big fan of.
Yeah, so I'm a Vipers fan myself because I got a couple boys down there. But I thought the Vipers played a good game. I mean, Jeff Badette, he's really good. I'm a little about Luis Perez. I mean, I feel like he played out of all the quarterbacks this week, he played the best. But that's considering like he played spring football for over like who knows how long now. But I think he's experienced, so they'll keep him in there. But I do want to see Brett Hundley out there next week, in some form. I thought that the Vipers kind of just their offensive line, like same thing with Seattle. They went from one of the best to the worst real quick. So I think they need to limit the penalties. I think they need to figure out how to get Martavis more involved. I know it's hard because they have a safety on top of Martavis. So it's like he's getting double teamed the whole game. So, I mean, I feel like I want to see more consistency too from the Vipers running game. And I think Arlington played really good, like TJ Barnes, Donald Payne, both of them really, their defense carried. I like Drew Pilt. I think he's actually decent. If he can clean up some of the bad throws, like I would watch out for him, honestly, in my opinion. So, yeah.
Michael, any thoughts on that Renegades Vipers game?
Honestly, it was for me. It was the shocking surprise that it was Arlington's defense that seemed to be ahead of Vegas's defense. I expected with the veteran side of Vegas and loaded with the NFL talent like Vic Beasley. You didn't hear Vic Beasley's name at all, really. Arlington did a great job of containing him for a good chunk of the game. And Luis Perez is an interesting case because he came out firing, looking like he did really good. Then the 2 pick sixes happened, and it kind of was like, well, that's the Luis Perez, the reason why he gets cut. I like Luis Perez. I liked him at the AAF. It's just I think that when it comes down to Vegas, they are going to have to look at some of that NFL veteran leadership, and I would not be surprised if Brett Hundley got into the game next week.
I would definitely have to agree. Me personally, I think that they need to put Hundley in the game. I mean, we all heard the reported rumors of what he's making, and if that's true and he's truly the highest paid quarterback in the league, there's a reason for it. I mean, they obviously wanted him to be the starter. So I think that Luis Perez got the benefit of the doubt this week due to the fact that he's been in camp with them all season. He knows the offense at this point, and Hundley was a little bit behind the 8 ball coming into camp late. So ultimately, I think we'll see him eventually. Travis, what were your thoughts on this game?
Yeah, like Michael said earlier about the DC game, I think this is a game of the tale of two halves. The Vipers looked very good in the first half, and then, holding Arlington only to 3 points in the first half, but then the Vipers themselves could only score 6 in the entire second half, and Arlington took control then. And, I mean, Drew Plitt cleaned up some of the mistakes by the end, while Luis Perez started making mistakes towards the end of the game. And also the very lack of a rush game by Vegas did not help them at all. They're trying to maintain a lead, but in total, in the entire game, they only had 15 carries. Their running backs are averaging 2 to 2.5 yards per game. And by the end, that's not going to cut it in the long run. That's not going to cut it. And it was a factor of why they lost this game too.
And Travis, I just want to echo, I mean, one of my biggest concerns with Vegas and the reason why I didn't have them ranked first in my power rankings was because of that rush game.
Yeah.
Rod Smith is as much as I like him, he's not a guy who, is capable of carrying a team, in my opinion. And I don't think they have anybody there that really is capable of doing it. And it doesn't mean that they don't have good running backs. It's just I think with that offensive scheme and what they would need, it's not going to work for them, because if they do get a lead, they're going to have to rely on throwing the ball. Whether it's Brett Hundley or Luis Perez, it's not their strongest suit. They're going to have to be able to run that clock down, especially with the XFL rules with the clock. So
Yeah, right. I mean, once you get later in the season, and you're going to start needing a guy who can run in between the tackles to close out these games, and that's something that they lacked this week.
Yeah, I really thought, like, I was honestly on the other side of the fence there. I thought Rod Smith was going to be that guy. I know he's always kind of been that third back special teams guy in the NFL, but I personally thought that this would be his opportunity to show he was a little bit more than that. I was wrong. I'm going to eat some crow there. I personally, like I said, I thought he was going to be good. Maybe he proves us wrong over the next couple of weeks, but as of right now, I think you got to look at your other options quite heavily over the next couple of weeks, specifically DeAndre Torrey, who spent some time in the USFL with the Michigan Panthers, would be my pick.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo that. I was going to say DeAndre Torrey would be a guy that, you probably need to give a little bit of a look to. And I just, Rod Smith always just been a guy to me that seems to run too straight up. And he almost looks like he's running in cement. I don't understand it. I don't know what his speed is, but it always looks like he's just running with cement shoes on. I don't know if anybody else gets that when he carries the ball, but I certainly do.
Yeah, I think he's about a 4.5, high 4.5, high 4.6 guy, somewhere in that range. He's not a very quick guy by any stretch. He's played fullback quite a bit because of that, I think. But anyway, moving on to the Roughnecks and Guardians, 33-12. Real quick, we're just going to run through this really fast. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this game, but is anybody surprised to see Orlando blown out in this game?
Yes.
No.
I am personally. I mean, I think they have some good offensive pieces. Charleston Rambo, Andrew DeMille, Dietrich Thomas. On the offensive side, on the defensive side, they don't have anything. So maybe a little bit. Like, I expected them to lose by maybe 2 scores, but not the way they lost, honestly.
I mean, we're talking about everybody's preseason power rankings of being 7 or 8 here. It's nothing against any of the talent that they do have. I just don't think that the team was put together right. I mean, one of the first things I told you was the roster construction looked extremely weird to me. And Paxton Lynch is, I don't know how many chances we're going to give this guy. I know he got benched, so, fingers crossed that maybe we'll, see DeAndre Francois or Dormady be able to turn it around for the Guardians, because I am rooting for them. Don't get me wrong. It's just, it doesn't surprise me one bit.
I agree with that. I mean, I think a lot of these teams, they start off fast. This Guardians team doesn't. They don't play fast at all. They play downhill, and that's not going to work, honestly.
Yeah, not anytime soon anyway. Yeah, as I was just showing you guys, bottom of our power rankings. So, I mean, to be quite honest, this doesn't really surprise the vast majority of us. Krish was not here for the original power rankings, so I would have been interested to see his rankings. But moving on to that Battlehawks and Brahmas game. To me, it seemed like the Brahmas had this one in hand at one point, and then a very, very XFL man, I mean, how do I want to put this? Basically, if the XFL were to make a commercial, they should put that comeback on it, because that was a storybook comeback of XFL proportions, because they got the 4th and 15. They went and got the 3-point conversion. Everything about that drive was what the XFL is about, personally. So with that in mind, I mean, what was your guys' thoughts on the Battlehawks comeback? Let's start with Michael.
I mean, this game right here is going to be the cornerstone of the XFL succeeding. This is going to be the one game that everybody's going to look at and go, look, yes, it was the lowest scoring game. Yes, it was boring for probably about 3 3/4 of a game. But it was close, and it was competitive, and it was a defensive battle that ended up showcasing just what the XFL is about, like you said. The touchdown, the 3-point conversion, that 4th and 15 for the onside kick replacement is absolutely fantastic. I had some people that were like, oh, there's going to be a bunch of teams that's going to get that easy. And I'm like, you don't really watch football if you think 15 yards is easy. Doesn't matter what level it is. It's not easy. And, just being able to go down there last minute and get that touchdown was incredible to watch. But that's going to be the cornerstone and the staple. And the XFL should hang their hat on that game regardless if it was the lowest scoring game or not.
I would agree. I mean, yeah, if anybody thought that was going to be easy, go back and rewatch that Vipers Renegades game. See what happened to Geronimo Allison when he tried to come across the middle with Donald Payne right there. Travis, what are your thoughts on this game?
Yeah, I mean, St. Louis came out really slow, and they weren't able to put up any points in the first half except for 3. And then, then scoring 15 points in the fourth quarter alone to put them up. They ended up winning 18-15. And, I mean, A.J. McCarron and Austin Prohl is the saviors for them. I mean, they had an incredible last 2 minutes, I believe, is whenever they scored all 15 points. And I mean, like you said, this is going to be the cornerstone of week 1 for the XFL. This is going to be the game to hang their hat on to show like it really comes down to the last minute. I love the 4th and 15 as their onside kick thing. I love that because I think it keeps teams in games longer. So, I think this just shows exactly what the XFL is about, that you have to watch to the very end.
I definitely, I'm a perfect example of that. I didn't catch the second half of the Sea Dragons game, and DC won. Chris, real quick, what are your thoughts? And then we're gonna go to our new segment that don't impress me much.
Sure. So speaking about that, I know Michael loves Jack Cohen, but I think Jack Cohen, I thought he was gonna be really bad, honestly, and he showed some flashes, but he's not gonna get the job done. Honestly, like they need a mobile guy like Jawan Pass back there. If I want to see what Jawan Pass is, like watching his college highlights, I'm not impressed at all, to be honest. But I want to see him out there. Maybe a couple years he's better. But I thought St. Louis, like Travis said, they really showed up. AJ McCarron, I thought played great that last 2 minutes. But for a lot of people on Twitter trying to say that AJ is about to dominate the league, like no. Like, it's not going to be that way. So I'm interested to see what they look like next week.
Absolutely. So here's the new segment. Quick intro video.
Don't impress me much.
I love this, by the way. I had to narrow down between Paxton Lynch and Jack Cohen. And for me, Paxton Lynch is gonna take it just because here's a guy who came from the Michigan Panthers of the USFL last year. He struggled as a first-round pick in the NFL. He did not light up the USFL. He struggled in the USFL, in my opinion, with Michigan Panthers. I mean, I think they won 3 games. I don't know how many of those he started for, but overall, Paxton Lynch just looked lost out there. He had a very impressive opening drive, but it's very easy to do that because every team scripts their first 12 to 15 plays. Once the game flow happens, Paxton Lynch was just lost. It just looked like he had no idea what to do, which led to his benching. And when you get benched for Dormady, and no disrespect, to Dormady, no offense, as my column through Shady Sports is called, to Dormady at all. If you're being benched for Dormady, Quentin Dormady, it's a problem. Dormady was a guy who is more of a project. He's a guy who isn't primed and polished to be in this spot. Paxton Lynch should be in a much more better frame of mind, being able to get another chance to show what he can do, especially if his goal is to try to get back to the NFL. And he didn't impress me at all. And if this is what Terrell Buckley is going to do down there and not make a switch to a more athletic DeAndre Francois, it's going to be a very long season for Orlando Guardians fans, unfortunately, which is what we predicted in the preseason. So
that is very true. That's very true. So that's our new segment. That don't impress me much. If you didn't catch episode 1, there's a reason why that came about, and it is involved with Jack Cohen. So it's probably a good thing that he didn't get on the list twice in a row. But we want to introduce our fantasy football expert from fantasyguru.com, Mr. Mark Hogan. Mark, thank you so much for joining us tonight. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. Appreciate you having me. Thanks for taking some time here.
Absolutely. We should be thanking you for taking your time. So obviously, I kind of gave you a little bit of an introduction there. You're our fantasy expert. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit? Talk about why you're the fantasy expert and how long you've been playing fantasy football.
Sure, definitely. So, well, I've been playing fantasy football, I would say, all my life. So, probably started when I was like 6 or 7 years old. But I've been probably dabbling in DFS now for roughly 10 years or so. And I would say really over the past 3 seasons now, from an NFL standpoint, I've been able to knock down a number of tournaments. I'm definitely more of a tournament player than a cash games player by um, uh, for lack of a better way of describing it. But really, I think I've developed a process, and that's what I think is most important when it comes to DFS is you can be spot on with what you think is going to happen. But if you don't know pricing and you don't know what kind of tournaments to play, that's really half the battle. So I think I've been able to kind of figure that out a little bit and make a nice little side hustle out of watching some football over the past few seasons. Before that, though, I did used to work in sports for a good period of time. I did worked for an MLB team for roughly 7 seasons, the New York Mets, and I was with the Tampa Bay Vipers during the 2020 iteration of the XFL. So, got to see some of the behind the scenes stuff on the business front of things. Know some folks that do work within the XFL currently, and also some folks that are within the industry. So do have a little bit of, I think, unique perception, but at the same time, I'm just another diehard fan, big football fan in general, and just ready to enjoy some games and watch here. So really was impressed by, I would say, this past weekend, and excited to really get into the rest of the season here.
Absolutely. So I want to preface this segment by saying that it's obviously week 2 in a brand new league that has, sprung up out of the blue after 3 seasons of not playing. So we're not saying that this is concrete advice yet. Obviously we need a bigger sample size to say, what the trends are, etc. But if anybody's here to give you some solid advice, Mark is the guy. So Mark, who are some players we should be looking at this week for DFS fantasy?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And that, I will add to that. It is early in the season. So play light, give it a few weeks to see how the landscape plays out. And then start hammering start hammering those bets towards the end of the season, right? So I'll start with quarterback, and I was listening to the show before I hopped in here, and you guys took a lot of my talking points here from a quarterback standpoint. So my first real play was really the Vegas quarterback situation. So if Hunley ends up being the starter, I expect him to be in the majority of my lineups going into this weekend. He's $7,000 on DK, and just to put it into perspective, pretty much every other starting quarterback is going to be a higher price point than that. I think Michael had pointed out where, or maybe it was you, where there's rumors about him being the highest paid quarterback in the XFL. I do believe that that's probably true, and so I think it's really just a matter of not a matter of if, but a matter of when he gets that starting job. And I wouldn't be surprised the way Perez ended last week if he was played this weekend. If he doesn't and Perez is still the starter, I am still interested in that. Just kind of given that offense, obviously that receiver group is stacked. It's the best receiver group in the XFL, in my opinion. So there's still plenty of opportunity there. And you guys were talking about the run game. The run game is essentially non-existent. Rod Smith looks, no knock on the guy. I'm sure he's a great person, but he just did not look good, and has not looked good. So that's my thought process on that front. I'm looking at the Vegas quarterback situation very closely. And you guys referenced this one as well. So this is going to be a little bit of a contrarian play. Again, I'm a tournaments player. I like Jack Cohn at $8,200. It's a good price point. I think the Orlando offense is going to really, force that defense to be out on the field for the majority of the game. And in tournaments, you need to get a little bit different. I think there are a lot of people, the chalk is going to be that Brahma's run game because they did look good. But, if you're a football person and you know it, everyone knows that a good run game can open up a pass game. And what happens if they do run the ball effectively, but then, air it out down the field? I think Jalen Tolliver obviously is a great target for a scheme like that. So I wouldn't be surprised if Jack Cohn, Jalen Tolliver were able to hook up and kind of give us a nice little combo stack from there. So if I go into the running back situation in our fantasy league, is everyone in this chat in the fantasy league?
Every single one of us.
Every single one of us is. Yep.
Okay. So I am definitely a Brian Hill, a big fan of Brian Hill. So I liked how he looked. I'm curious what how he shows up on the injury report this week. So again, I think we're at the beginning of the week, but let's keep a close eye on that and make sure there's nothing wrong there. He did come out for a good portion of the game, but he came back in, and I think it was after when he came back in and ripped off like a 40-yard run. So I thought he looked really good. It was like an outside zone play, I want to say, and was able to turn that corner pretty quickly. I also think from the St. Louis offensive perspective, they don't want to pass the ball. Like it seemed very clear to me in that game. I don't know how you guys feel about this, but they just really did not look like they were interested in passing the ball until they absolutely had to at the end of the game. Now, with that being said, it worked. And I think that Austin Prohl, which I'll talk about in a little bit, was, of course, the reason why I'm a big Austin Prohl fan as well, even watching him in the previous XFL. And I just kind of gave away one of my receiver plays. But I think overall, just that offense does want to still run the ball primarily. So my second running back I'll give you guys is another little bit of a contrarian play, and certainly isn't the full-blown starter, but Davion Smith, $5,700. Really a cheap running back in a nice looking offense. So, despite him sharing the workload with Keith Ford, I thought that, there was a little bit of Ford really didn't look that great. And Smith really looked like the guy to play at the goal line. So, I feel like there is a little bit of that touchdown equity and opportunity for him as well. And at that price point, I'm willing to take it because it's another leverage play. Tough matchup, but that's what will steer a lot of people away. And ownership is everything in DFS. When I go to receivers, again, I talked about Austin Prohl. So I think, he is he was very quiet for a good portion of that game. But at the end of the day, I did feel like he has true chemistry with AJ McCarron. I think they are going to rely on him in that offense moving forward. And he's still a very cheap price point at $4,400. He's probably going to be pretty chalky. With that being said, I'm okay eating chalk if it's a cheap play. Because if it doesn't work out, I still didn't use a whole lot of my salary with it. And if it does work out, I'm still going to ride with the field. I'm not going to fall behind. So I like Prohl. Latimer's interesting with the Guardians. I was hesitant to bring Latimer up because obviously there is some chemistry with him and Lynch, and I think the whole Lynch experiment's pretty much done. But he was a guy that really came through for them. That was an interception. I mean, I don't know how. I thought it was a pick. But at the end of the day, he's a gamer. He's got some NFL experience. I still expect him to be involved with that offense. And he's $3,700. So again, another cheap guy that then you can pay up in other spots for by placing him in your lineup. Couple honorable mentions from a receiver's standpoint. Eli Rogers and Fred Brown are both super cheap. So for instance, with that comb play, a Fred Brown, combo is nice. And Eli Rogers, again, if they're going to be playing from behind, he is pretty much min salary on DraftKings. Sal Cannella at tight end. He's the Travis Kelce of the XFL. I've said it before. I'll say it again. I think everyone else probably agrees in this room. He is by far, in my opinion, the best option. Don't even question it. If you're going to roster a tight end, just go Sal Cannella. And then at the end of the day, team defense, I like to pay down for defense, and I'm not impressed with the Guardians, so I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to take San Antonio. I'm going to take their defense as my defensive play here, save a little bit of money, and hope that, that trend with the Guardians continues and they can force a few turnovers and keep the score low.
Very nice. Very nice. Any questions, guys? Michael, you look like you're tempted.
No, not on the DFS front. I'm terrible at DFS. Everything that he said, I try to employ when I play DFS, and I still somehow bomb out. I don't get it. It's awful. I'm a season long guy. I've been doing it forever. Dynasty. I'm into Devi. I'm into all that stuff. So on the NFL front, that's why I did the alt fantasy league. My only question for Mark is you finished second in scoring this week. How does that make you feel?
Yeah. I'm assuming I think you said before your team took the top scoring spot. So obviously you had some nice guys go off, and but I'm coming for that number one spot. So I feel pretty good about my team. I think even the guys that underperformed are going to bounce back too. So we'll see.
Well, when Sam put up that wide receiver numbers, all three of those guys are on my team, or two of them are. Sorry, Pierce and Burnett are. Yeah, but that's on my other team.
Well, let's put it. I want to shout out Mike Mitchell real quick, because right before the game he goes, "Watch out for Jeff Badet," and that's all he said basically. And then next thing we know, it's like he's got 6 receptions, 90 yards, and 2 touchdowns. I'm like, what just happened? Like, it was, we're 2 quarters into the game, and he's already balling out like that. So it was surprising.
Yeah, so I'm a deep DFS player myself. I use my dad's account, by the way, but I've been doing it for like years, honestly. And I create lineups, and I lose a bunch of money, but
on his dad's account too, right?
I still have like $191. So I'm after that's out, I'm done. But how much money should you be spending to get a profit? Like, I spend $5 to $10 on big time competitions, and I'm still finishing like in the top 10, but I'm not like winning back my money that I put in.
Yeah, well, and I would say it's all relative. One thing I will point out, really my wheelhouse is I look for tournaments that are 1,000 people or less, preferably 500 people or less. I do like to play a little bit higher stakes because personally, I don't think the Sharks are actually very good. They just spray and pray and throw out 150 lineups and just hope that one of them hits. So when you play those single entry small tournaments where they can only put in one entry, it really levels the playing field. So personally, my recommendation is play single entry tournaments, maybe 1,000 people or less or 500 people or less. And at the end of the day, whatever price point you are most comfortable with, if you have a bankroll of $191, for example, I don't like to spend any more than 10% of what my total bankroll is at that time. So in that scenario, I wouldn't want to spend more than $20 on a weekend, right? So my thought process is 10% or less, no matter what. Play your favorite plays at the end of the day, who you trust and who your gut instinct is. So you can only get mad at yourself if they don't do well. And those smaller tournaments, single entry are my best recommendation. If you really feel like you got a good lineup, throw the same exact lineup into the main tournament and hope you win big.
Definitely. Thank you.
That was a great question, Chris. That is not something I would have thought to ask for sure. So definitely glad you asked that. Travis, you got anything?
Yeah, I'm just wondering how I got lucky enough to end up playing you week 1 in fantasy. That's all I'm wondering.
Yeah.
I didn't lose too badly, though. I mean, the main reason that I lost is because Darius Shepard didn't really perform. And, Sal Cannella ended up going off. Really, that's the main reason that I lost. And Jack Cohn didn't do amazing. The turnovers didn't help at all. But, I didn't lose. I think it was respectable. So
You have 8-man too, right?
Yeah.
So that was the reason why I ended up playing Prohl, was just I was like, well, he's a lottery guy, and if he has 8-man and Shepard, if Prohl does something, it's a direct correlation. So I didn't just randomly play Prohl, for the heck of it. It was based off of your lineup, quite honestly. So
yeah,
interesting.
I was really
Interesting
hoping to
strategy.
get AJ McCarron, and then you ended up stealing him like right before I got him, and then I had to get a little bit more creative with my plays on quarterback, so that's how I ended up with Cone and Cole McDonald. So I hope Cole McDonald or Cone ends up, really being their prominent starter for their team.
I got to be honest, this is my first time ever playing alt fantasy football. So I thought it was very interesting, the strategy that you had to employ when it came to quarterbacks. Because you look at some of these guys and they may be the day one starter, but they're not going to be the week 3 starter. They're not going to be the week 4 starter. So I did it on my other team, actually. I drafted Luis Perez because he was a good, solid first pick. And then I went and got Kyle Sloter, even though he wasn't the day one starter. I anticipate he takes over by week 3. And then probably by week 3, Luis Perez is on the backup, on the bench. So it'll be kind of interesting to see if I'm right. If not, I might be potentially hurting a quarterback real quick. But Mark, thank you so much for joining us, man. I really appreciate your input. Where can we check out all of your content?
Yeah, I appreciate that. So I'm a contributor now with Fantasy Guru. So if you go to fantasyguru.com or Elite Sports, Jeff Manns and his crew have been fortunate to hop on board with them. My Twitter is probably going to be the main source for any of my personal content. So at DFS_Marlin. Feel free to give me a follow, and I'll try and repost as much content as I can that's for free. And if you do want to get all of our exclusive content, feel free to go over and subscribe at fantasyguru.com.
Absolutely. Definitely go check that out right away if you want to win some money. Always good to have a good expert in your back pocket when you're, wagering on fantasy football. But thank you again, Mark. I appreciate it. And then maybe we can get you back on next week or something like that.
Would love to. I appreciate you guys having me on. Let's talk soon.
Absolutely. Have a great night.
Too.
All right. So we are moving on to the USFL section of the video tonight. Obviously, we've gotten some very recent news with the USFL throwing a draft tomorrow. Very, very last minute notice. I thought that was kind of interesting. So let's go ahead and kick it off right there. What are your guys' thoughts about how they're promoting this draft for the USFL? Let's start with Michael.
Man, it's hard. USFL's got a lot of good people in place in management and everything else, the behind the scenes stuff. But I feel like they're still somehow scrambling, and it's very weird to me to see it going into year 2, when year 1 is usually the one where you want to. It's where the scrambling comes from, and I don't think they thought the draft through. We discussed this, Sam, where I was just like, well, what's the point of having a draft if you're just going to keep free agency open? But with the XFL being where they play and where the USFL starts, they really don't have a choice but to keep free agency open, because they have to be able to sign the players that don't make the XFL squads and try to lure them away so they're not like hovering in case injuries happen and they bring them back. And then on top of that, this USFL draft is, in concept, I like it, but I have so many questions because they're calling it a college player draft, and then they're saying 2023 college eligible, but is it open to all college players? You don't get any clarification whether or not you can draft the rights to a sophomore or not. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's no clarification to that. That's the number one question I keep getting from people when they're looking at this USFL draft. They're like, well, does that mean they can draft a sophomore from LSU that's like 6th on the depth chart? No idea. I don't have an answer for you. I can't tell you. I don't think it is. I think it's just for the eligible players coming in, and that's what I tell people, but there's no clarification, so I don't have a choice on that. But I don't like the quick turnaround, the announcement, and then boom, 3 days later. I know it's through social media, so it's not as big of a deal because it's not going to be on TV, but it's still like, boom, in your face, here you go. Now you're all set. And it's like,
Yeah, I don't like that. I personally don't like it because I've been reaching out to coaches, etc., for months trying to figure out information about it, and nobody would give me anything, and it all came out on Discord. Discord, of all places. That's where the information started breaking from Jaron Horton, the defensive coordinator of the Pittsburgh Maulers. But it was very interesting to see how this all came about. I spoke about it quite a bit off camera. You and I kind of went back and forth on what the draft would look like. And this was kind of exactly what I expected. A CFL styled draft where basically it's a calculated gamble. You are gambling on which players will not get selected or signed by an NFL team, because if they do, chances are they're taking that offer. Even practice squad players are making more than what the USFL players make. So 9 times out of 10, those guys are going to go unless they see a chance to improve their stock, which if you're already getting NFL offers, it's kind of hard to see the USFL or XFL really improving your stock at that point. But Chris, what are your thoughts on the draft and the quick turnaround?
I mean, you know how I feel about the USFL. Like, I want to see these leagues succeed, but like, I think this is the last year of the USFL, to be honest with you. I don't think they have the proper pieces in place to be successful. I know Fox signed that deal with them, but they're doing stuff like this college draft, like you yourself said, like Discord and stuff like that. Like, there needs to be a level of professionalism that I just don't think they have or they're capable of having. I think that when you should put a pool out there. Like, I want to know who you're going to draft. Because when, like, no offense, but like when the first pick is a Division III guy and I'm expecting to see Stetson Bennett at the first pick, like, I'm going to be disappointed, you know? So, like, give me something to expect. There's nothing to expect, you know? So I just want to know what type of talent is there? You know, are you taking a guy like a DJ Turner from Last Chance U, who's a fifth-year senior at Hawaii, you know? Like, who are you going with? So I think it can be successful, but I think these rosters are going to just overflow with guys, and then it's gonna be an issue there. So I don't know how I feel about that at all. I'm not a fan, to be honest.
Travis, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, like you kind of touched on, Sam, about how, they're drafting guys who might not get drafted to the NFL. So we see this with the CFL, where guys will get drafted and then never end up playing for the team because they might pursue a different offer. And how we talked about for months, they're not releasing any information about the draft. They're not releasing any information. And then all of a sudden we get it. Oh, the draft is next week. And then it's like, I think it kind of makes the draft seem very unimportant because of the way that they went about it. And, the entire first round of players, we have no idea if they're even going to ever play on those teams. So I think just the way the USFL has done their business model and made their draft, it makes it feel very unimportant to me.
That's fair. I mean, especially the way that they've promoted it, like I talked about. I mean, we couldn't get any information at all from anybody, not even the media contacts within the league. And, obviously by design, maybe they didn't know what was going on yet. Maybe they figured this all out fairly recently. Like Michael said, the appearance of everything from an outsider's perspective looks like they're scrambling. And I said it off camera to you guys a little bit ago, right before we came on live. It almost looks to me like they weren't expecting to get to this point. And I don't want to say that about the league because obviously they hope and they want to succeed. But if you think about it, it's been over a decade since another spring league got to a season 2. And now here we are, season 2. They're determining a draft, which hasn't happened in God knows how long for a spring league. And it's just a situation where, we're ultimately borrowing, modifying, looking for concepts from other leagues that have done it before. And ultimately they come out with this because it's their only real option, based on when they play, with them playing right in the middle of the NFL draft. There's, it's really hard for them to draw talent away from the NFL. So like you guys said, chances are we're looking at a lot of guys that are not even on the NFL radar, or if they are, they're a long shot to be on an NFL squad come the season.
Yeah, and me and Sam both said it to each other as soon as the Pittsburgh Maulers signed James Morgan, a former NFL guy. We're like, well, who are they going to draft if you can sign free agents like this right now? Why is the draft important then, And like, what's the draft pool going to be like? And then we ended up finding out, not what the draft pool is, but essentially what they're planning on doing.
Absolutely. I will say there is some strategy here. For instance, if you know that the USFL as a coach is going to be around year 2, year 3, you can draft a player that may not come right away. Maybe you get the rights to a guy who is a 7th round pick and he ultimately ends up on the practice squad this season, but next season he's off a roster and you get him, and he's a solid player that had some off-field issues or something like that. So I could see scenarios like that, but ultimately it's going to be hit or miss for sure.
Just to kind of compound all that, it's almost as if the USFL didn't plan on the XFL. It really just feels like, even though the XFL was announced, it's almost like the USFL just wanted to put on blinders to the fact that the XFL was going to play. It was almost like they were just hoping that the XFL was just going to go away because of this, reactionary thing. Like Travis said, the draft feels unimportant, but it kind of compounds to what I was saying to you earlier. If you can just sign players right now, what is the point of having a draft? Now, I will say, I like the idea of trying to inject youth for future seasons because you are at least attempting at longevity in some capacity here. But I remember a couple years ago in the CFL draft, Chuba Hubbard was drafted to a CFL team. He's never going there. He will never go back to Canada unless it's like the tail end of his career. He's fine where he's at in Carolina. So is the USFL going to take similar risk like that, or are they going to try to stay chalk and go with, the guy from Charlotte or the guy from, Division II South Dakota, or a guy from, some Division III, school that nobody's heard of? Are they going to go that route and try to go after those players? Because if you look at the XFL and you kind of look at some of the USFL players, a lot of these guys are coming from smaller schools, some colleges you've never even heard of, and it's worked to a degree, but is it sustainable? And that's really where my question is.
Yeah, in my opinion, I think the first overall pick in the USFL draft tomorrow is going to be Tyson Bagent, quarterback out of Shepherd University. He was in the Senior Bowl this year, and he didn't do that great, but I think he's a guy the NFL teams were looking at, but they were concerned about the level of competition he played against because obviously he played at the D2 school. So I would watch out for him. That's one name that I'm hoping that gets drafted tomorrow.
Well, it'll be very interesting to see. It all starts at 1 p.m. Eastern and will be released via Twitter, much like their initial draft, which I personally don't like it. I don't like how they do that. I would rather get some sort of video, even if it's just a quick, 5-second video. Hey, we drafted this player, or a graphic, or to me, there needs to be a little bit more effort. But like you guys said, they're already approaching it as if the draft is not necessarily the most important thing in the world. And it might be by design. I mean, if we think about it, why put a bunch of promotion into something, build it all up, and then draft a bunch of Division II and Division III players that none of us have really heard of unless you're a college football fan? So there is that thought process there. Why get fans all excited for something that may not even really affect the league in 2023? It might be something that's more for 2024 or down the line. But I will say, to anybody who is a fan of the USFL, every coach I've ever talked to, anybody involved in the league, employed by the league, they don't talk about next season. They don't talk about 2 seasons from now. They talk about 5 years from now. They talk about 10 years from now. They talk about the very long term because Fox is setting this up to be the long game. They're not trying to be the flash in the pan that the XFL is. And I don't mean that the XFL is going to, burn out anytime soon. It's just the XFL realizes they need that flash to draw fans in. The USFL is taking a little bit more conservative approach and not necessarily spending the money that the XFL is up front. But both of these approaches have merit. So it'll be interesting to see exactly how they all shake out.
There is nothing wrong with that approach. And I want to make sure I say that because I know it feels like we've kind of dumped on the USFL with this, but there's nothing wrong with that approach. And the approach is very efficient and very effective because it does save you money over the course of the long. They have the media rights and package in place with Fox. They're getting a good deal with the NBC. And anytime that you hear about these executives and you hear them talking, they're talking about the ratings being comparable to MLS, to MLB, to NBA. They're not talking about the NFL ratings, because what's the point? You're not competing against the NFL in the spring. You're competing against MLS. You're competing against the Major League. And last year, USFL, their ratings were amongst the top out of all sports, including NBA and MLB. So the USFL has a good approach. It's just stuff like this. And like you said, maybe it's by design that the draft doesn't feel important. It very possibly may not be, and that's the reason why they didn't feel like they needed to move up their season. Leave it in April. If one of these guys wants to come play, they can come play immediately. If not, they don't count towards the roster. So it's a very methodical and different type of approach. Some fans aren't patient, as you know. Fans are not patient at all, and I just don't know if it's going to be one of those things that's the right method, but it's an effective method that eventually should pay dividends, like you said, 3, 4, 5 years down the road.
100%. 100%. One thing about the CFL draft that a lot of people don't talk about is the fact that some of those teams do draft with a long-term view. They're not looking at the right away. They're not drafting a guy because he's going to be in the CFL in year one. You know, a great example was the Chuba Hubbard you threw out there. Chuba Hubbard was what, a 5th-round pick in the NFL? So it's reasonable to believe that at some point he's going to be on the bottom end of a roster depending on how his career goes. So they take that calculated risk. They draft a player who's really a top-end CFL talent, maybe not so much in the NFL, but, you know, there's an opportunity for him to come out there, ball out if he ever gets to that point in his career. Now, some of them obviously never get to that point. In fact, there's a lot of guys that go on the CFL negotiation list, much like Vic Beasley, actually, that never end up in the CFL. He was on the CFL negotiation list for the Ottawa Red Blacks and never stepped foot in the league, you know, never ended up playing up there. So, I mean, there's a lot of situations like that where you just basically target players that you think will go. And if they don't, you move on. It is what it is. Quick thoughts on the Houston Gamblers coaching change. Obviously, we all know Kevin Sumlin has taken the co-offensive coordinator and tight ends coach position with Maryland. They have replaced him with Curtis Johnson, former wide receiver coach from the Super Bowl winning New Orleans Saints and former head coach at Tulane. Michael, I believe you had some thoughts on him as a head coach at Tulane.
Yeah, when he was at Tulane, I didn't mind him. I thought he was a good coach down there. I mean, Tulane is in a tough part of the country because it is all SEC country, and University of Louisiana, even with the Sun Belt recently, has been really, really competitive. Obviously, Tulane had good success this year. I don't think that really contributes to anything that Johnson did when he was there, but Johnson has a pretty good resume. He was also on the 2001 Miami Hurricane coaching staff that won the national championship. He was the wide receivers coach there as well. So he has the experience. And if you really honestly think about anytime you get a D1 head coaching job, regardless of where it is, a D1 head coaching job at FBS, you definitely have opened some eyes to some people. Now, he didn't progress up, which doesn't always happen to people, but the USFL is a perfect spot for him to kind of put his experience and knowledge to the test as not only a player, but as a coach. So I'm okay with it. I think Kevin Sumlin is a better head coach. I just think Sumlin really just wanted to be in college football. I honestly think that that's where he wanted to be, wanted to use the USFL to kind of jumpstart his career, restart his career, I should say, and he's getting another chance. Me personally, I wouldn't have taken it. I would have rather been a head coach at a professional level, even if it is the USFL, than going to some mid-level Big Ten team and being an offensive coordinator where you may or may not get recognized. Because no offense to anybody in Maryland, they can't bring in the recruits that a lot of the other Big Ten schools can. So I will be very interested to see what happens because it's so close to the start of the training camp. But I think that there's enough time that everybody can get acclimated and he can put together a decent staff. I think.
It'll be interesting. There was some reports out that there were some staff members hired. Defensive lineman Philip Daniels, former NFL defensive lineman Philip Daniels, was going to coach defensive line, and I'm blanking the linebacker coach's name at the moment, but they have both decided to pursue other opportunities now that Sumlin's no longer there. He has hired a linebacker coach, and actually, we will be having him on the channel next weekend at 9 a.m. Eastern. So definitely check that out. I believe the 25th. I'll make sure to get that link up pretty quick here. Travis, what are your thoughts on the coaching change for the Houston Gamblers?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know a whole lot about him, but just like Michael said, he likes his resume, and it's a really interesting opportunity, and I am interested to see what he can do. This is a Houston Gamblers team that didn't play great, so we're going to see if they can take a step forward in USFL season number 2.
Absolutely. Chris, did you have any thoughts about Curtis Johnson as the Houston Gamblers head coach?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty good. Sean Payne recommended him to Daryl Johnson, so I think that speaks about him. He has a lot of coaching experience, so I think he'll be a solid head coach in the USFL.
Absolutely. One thing I did want to point out is there were 4 head coaching changes, I believe, at this point. Ray Horton in Pittsburgh. We got Curtis Johnson with the Houston Gamblers. We got John DeFilippo with the New Orleans Breakers. And I am blanking the 4th one at the moment. Anybody remember? That might be the only one.
The one from Michigan? I forget his name.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Jeff Fisher was replaced by Mike Nolan.
Mike Nolan, that's it.
Okay, so my thought, one thing I wanted to bring up is the fact that Ray Horton won 2 Super Bowls. John DeFilippo won a Super Bowl as a quarterback coach with Philadelphia. Mike Nolan's been to a Super Bowl. I don't think he's ever won one. And Curtis Johnson won a Super Bowl with the New Orleans Saints. These may not be big names, but they're NFL pedigree. They're Super Bowl winning NFL pedigree. You could do a lot worse, given the fact that you had to change 4 head coaches after season 1.
I think it's perfect. I think the USFL did this perfect because these are the kind of guys that you're looking at to come in and kind of they're trying to bridge themselves back to the NFL as well as bring their years of experience to the USFL to make it more legitimized. And anybody who follows the NFL at all knows the name Mike Nolan. They know the name John DeFilippo. They should know Ray Horton. If they don't know Ray Horton, then you need to understand who Ray Horton is.
Exactly.
Curtis Johnson, I could understand not necessarily knowing who he is, but all you have to do is do a deep dive and realize he's been part of a lot of good coaching staffs and has had a lot of good coaching experience. So I think they're perfect replacements for a lot of people. I mean, for the league, and it's also good for them. So I'm okay with the changes. I just wish that they were done earlier in the process for some of these guys. That's all.
Yeah, and I will say that I did reach out to the league to get some comment on some of these coaches. We had heard some whispers that Kevin Sumlin was going to be leaving for Maryland about a month ago. I reached out right after that to see if I could get comment from the league. Basically, what they told me is they would not be announcing any official coaching staffs as far as assistants to provide these guys flexibilities, which is basically code speak for we don't want to put our foot in our mouth, more or less, because they didn't want to announce coaches and then watch them leave for other opportunities that came up afterward. And that's basically what more or less happened to Kevin Sumlin. If you remember, earlier on in the offseason, at one point after the head coaching change that initially happened with New Orleans when Larry Fedora stepped down, I believe it was the USFL themselves put out a post that said, "We are happy to return 7 of 8 head coaches to the league." Here we are a month, 2 months later, we're discussing 3 more head coaching changes. So one of those situations where they spoke too soon, it kind of bit them in the butt. They've learned from their mistakes. Now they're going to keep it quiet until they know for sure these coaches are going to be with teams, which is probably in the best bet for everybody involved anyway, because I would assume that the coaches that left Houston did so because they thought Sumlin was going to be the head coach there. They had connections to Sumlin, whatever it may be. So let's move on and let's go ahead and take a brief look at Michael's most recent article, the offensive line rankings. For the week 1 XFL season. So Michael, why don't you go ahead and run us through your top offensive line for the season so far?
I mean, it's hard. Like we discussed a little bit earlier, these offensive lines are kind of patchwork. They're a work in progress. We don't really know full fledged where we are with them, as far as what to expect. But number one for me is the Houston Roughnecks, and it's not a surprise that the Houston Roughnecks are the team that tops this list because they top the power rankings and traditional power rankings as number one. They were the most dominant team. There was no pass rush from Orlando. I don't even know if Orlando got a tackle for loss in this situation with this game. So Brandon Silvers looked like an MVP out there. I mean, anytime you can make this guy look like he's actually good, means that you're probably in good shape. Again, no offense to Brandon Silvers, but we've seen him through the AAF and the XFL in the past. I don't know how much of that's fool's gold. We'll find out next week when they play a much tougher Arlington team. So Houston will top the list for now. Again, all 8 of these offensive lines had ups and downs. There was room for improvement in a lot of places. So once they get a little more cohesive, these should clear themselves up a little bit more. So number 2 on this list is actually Houston's opponent next week, and that's Arlington, which might surprise some people. I saw a post in one of the football groups that I'm in that said Arlington's offensive line was terrible. And for me, I actually didn't think so at all. I think they struggled a little bit early, but I didn't hear Vic Beasley's name. And Vic Beasley was a guy that, Sam, you're very adamant about it. I know some of the other XFL, pardon me, some of the XFL experts are expecting Vic Beasley to end up becoming, the sack leader in this league, or at least their projections are. I didn't hear his name against Vegas this week, so Arlington will be at number 2 right now. Their run blocking is still something that is a little left to be desired, but that kind of happened with every single team. The run game basically was non-existent for the most part. Number 3 on this list is actually the team that Arlington played, and that's Vegas. Vegas did a very good job of not letting Luis Perez be under pressure for a majority of the game. They struggled a little bit in the second half. Both those pick sixes, or one of those pick sixes, was not due to pressure. So that was on Luis Perez. So I can't count that against the Vegas O-line. One of them was. So Vegas kind of slid down a little bit. At first, it looked like that they were going to probably be the best offensive line in the league. They did a good job of controlling Arlington at the points of attack. The run defense, the run offense, though, the blocking on that is just it's either the running back or the offensive line. I can't figure out which, but right now Vegas is slotted in at 3, but 2 through 4 are all really close and interchangeable in my opinion. So number 4 in the top half of this is the DC Defenders. Late in the game yesterday, this offensive line really kind of came together. It took a little bit to get there, but they came together and really did a good job of slowing Seattle's defense down a little bit. And when they slowed the Seattle's defense down, Jordan Tiamu and De'Aaron King were able to have room to create, which is something that they both need. They have some issues. Raquel Armstead was averaged over 5 yards a carry. He looked really good. So the run, as far as the run blocking is concerned, this is probably the best run blocking offensive line unit, which shouldn't shock anybody who knows anything about the DC coaches, especially the offensive coordinator. But this was probably the most impressive offense. And as far as run blocking is concerned, their edge guys, their tackles are a little suspect, so they need to kind of clean that up a little bit, tighten that situation up. But I know that they didn't have a guy in the top 3 as far as rushing was concerned, but I think eventually either Armstead or Abram Smith will end up inside the top 3, and they might both end up inside the top 5 as the year goes on. The start of the bottom half of this is Seattle. The Sea Dragons at the beginning were looking really good. Davin Bellamy, who was with my New Orleans Breakers from the USFL last year and was lit it up, had a sack early, and then you didn't hear from him for a while in the first half. The second half, it fell apart for him. As soon as Greg Williams made an adjustment and started putting pressure on them, Ben DiNucci was under all kinds of pressure, making bad decision after bad decision. wasn't completing passes, had an interception to Michael Joseph, and then Michael Joseph got a second interception and was almost returned for a pick six. So they really started rattling DiNucci, and the offensive line couldn't protect from the defenders, defensive line and linebackers at that point. So the Sea Dragons, to me, will be at 5. They're probably closer to 4 than 6 is to 5. And at 6 is the St. Louis Battlehawks. The Battlehawks played in the lowest scoring game of the year. Adrian McCarron, somebody said that he only had like 2 incomplete passes or something at one point in time, which is fine. But he averaged less than 8 air yards per throw. He had to rush the ball out. A lot of checkdowns in this offense. They struggled early, and they had to come back to win their game against San Antonio. So they did not look the greatest, and I think that St. Louis is going to end up struggling in the long term if they can't get Brian Hill going. Now, Brian Hill is second in the league, but he only had 8 carries. He had 55 yards, but he had 1 rush for 40 yards. You take that away, he had 7 rushes for 15 yards. So they need to bring this offensive line together to glue it together, or it's going to be a long season for Anthony Becht, unfortunately. Number 7 is the team that they played in San Antonio. The Brahmas really struggled. Offensively, they had a very, very tough time. I don't know what it was. I couldn't quite pinpoint it. It was like pressure was coming in the middle. Pressure was coming from the edges. Jack Cohn had high pass after high pass after high pass. We mentioned it. We talked about it in the chat about how every single one of his passes looked like they were just sailing. And that's usually because the clock is internally sped up. Now, either that's because of pressure or because it just was too much for him as a rookie. Personally, it looked like to me there was just a lot of pressure coming, whether it was up the middle or the sides. And that pocket kind of collapsed a little bit. They looked good running the ball, but even then, Kalen Ballage had 24 rushes for 84 yards. It's not a very good yard per carry, yards per carry average, and that's something you kind of want to look at a little bit. So if you're going to run the ball 24 times, you're going to want to try to at least get into that 100-yard range. Not a terrible game, just not effective. You're not going to win a lot of games that way. And unsurprisingly, the very bottom of this list is Orlando. The Guardians they were dominated by Houston in every aspect. They gave up 8 sacks. They gave up 4 to Trent Harris. They gave up 2 to Tim Ward. Houston's got the top 2 sack leaders in the league right now. Guardians I don't know what the coaching staff around Terrell Buckley is looking like or what he feels like he needs to do, but a change is going to need to be faster than not, especially when it comes to this offensive line. I do want to make a quick note that St. Louis was number 6 also because they were the only offensive line to actively make changes after halftime. And San Antonio was at 7 because they also suffered 2 major injuries. I believe it was with their center and their offensive tackle, or their guard and their offensive tackle on the right side. They both didn't return to the game. So those injuries are going to play a huge factor into where San Antonio goes from. Just a little quick side note on that. So other than that, that's the offensive lines. I'm sure they'll change either drastically or not at all, week after week.
I actually was going to say that a big part of the reason San Antonio had struggles is they lost their starting center before the season even began. Jordan McRae, who came over from the USFL, he suffered a calf strain. So he's going to miss 3 to 6 weeks at a minimum. So they came into this game shorthanded already. And then, like you said, they suffered 2 injuries in the game. One of the guys that got injured was signed because of other injuries they had. Kai Abashir was a free agent just a couple weeks ago. They signed him right before the season. He got hurt. He was, I believe, cut and bleeding at one point in the game and re-entered the game and finished it out, I believe. So obviously, this is the time that everybody wants to be a part of the show. We're going to do our predictions for week 2. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up the betting odds, and we'll just go off of those games. We are doing FanDuel betting odds this week because gamblingsites.com, I think it was, not super reliable as far as I'm concerned. But here they are from FanDuel.com. Interesting that it's somehow showing baseball at the moment when I was just on the XFL. Sorry about that. So, okay, let's start with the first game here. We have a Thursday night game this week. The St. Louis Battlehawks versus the Seattle Sea Dragons. Seattle is at home. Chris, let's start with you. Predict the winner and then give us a score prediction.
In my opinion, this is the hardest game of the week to predict because I don't know what Seattle is going to do at quarterback. I want to see Harrison Frost so bad out there because I think that I know you love Steven Montez, but I mean, I think Steven Montez is trash, to be honest with you. For that, I went to one. I've been to one NFL game, and it was a preseason game, and I watched Steven Montez for one whole quarter. That was easily one of the worst showings I've ever seen of a quarterback. So he threw 3 interceptions. I don't think he's gonna get any better. I think Ben DiNucci, if he can improve, maybe. But I'm taking St. Louis in this one, and they're gonna win this game pretty handily. I'm taking St. Louis 21-6.
Okay. Michael, what's your prediction for this game?
I'm going on the opposite end here. I think Seattle's offense kind of proved that they do plan on being very much a June Jones type offense, and Ja'Cour Pearson is a X factor in this game. I mean, he caught 12 passes for 95 yards. Small little shifty guy. Ben DiNucci is a problem. Yes, I completely agree. I mean, 3 turnovers in a game is not going to cut it. Unfortunately for St. Louis, I don't think their defense is as good as DC's is, and the St. Louis offensive line has still got some problems. So I think Seattle's going to win this game at home because that crowd's going to be on fire. I'm going to say probably 26-19.
That sounds like a great score prediction. I'm sorry, which team was that?
Seattle.
Okay, that's what I thought you said.
Right, they are playing Seattle. Right? Okay, yeah. So.
All right, Travis, what is your thoughts on this game?
I also think this is a very interesting game to try to predict, but I mean, we all know my thoughts on Ben DiNucci. I'm interested to see what their quarterback solution is if they play Steven Montez at all this week. If they, I would like to also see Harrison Frost at some point. Might be still a little bit too early for him, but I think at the end of the day, even though we saw St. Louis struggle, I think now they're settled in a little bit because they picked up a lot of momentum in the last 2 minutes of that game. And I think now they can finally settle. And even though they're playing in treacherous territory in Seattle, I still think St. Louis ends up getting it done. And as for a score, I'm going to go with a 20-13 in favor of St. Louis.
All right. Well, not to go with the trend that is quickly forming in the group here, but I am also going to go with the Battlehawks this weekend. I am going to say they're going to win this game by 22-15. I am not an AJ McCarron fan. I'm still not an AJ McCarron fan after that drive, even though it was amazing to watch. I personally think that he at some point will prove to be the guy that we all expect him as, which is basically a mid-level quarterback. So at some point, he's going to prove us wrong. It's just not going to be this week. Why not continue to build up this little feud we got going with Seattle Sea Dragons on Twitter? So Seattle, if you're watching, still predicting you guys to lose this weekend. Nothing personal, just really got to get Ben DiNucci out of that starting position. So we got a couple comments rolling in. Colby Field says W's in the chat. XFL is lit. Colby, if you're still watching, what is your prediction for this game, the St. Louis Battlehawks at the Seattle Sea Dragons? Let's move on to the next game, DC Defenders at Vegas Vipers. Chris, what is your thought on this game?
I mean, I think the big X factor in this game is Marshall Spate. If you see Marshall out there, they're winning this game easily. I think DC is rough at quarterback. I hate to say it because I know we have 2 Defender fans. But, you saw Jordan Tamahu, and if you were watching the game with both your eyes open, you would see what I saw. He's very inconsistent. He has no arm strength whatsoever. I don't think De'Aaron King can throw the ball at all. I think he's a runner, and I think he'll be a great wide receiver, or maybe out of the backfield, kind of like Taysom Hill, a smaller version of Taysom Hill. So I'm taking the Vipers to win this game 28-7.
Ouch.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead, Michael.
I think Jordan Tiamu will definitely settle in. De'Aaron King was a hell of a passer at Houston. I mean, the guy was absolutely phenomenal at Houston. He didn't really get a chance to showcase it in Miami. He got injured. The two quarterback systems always worry me, and I think that Tiamu struggled a bit because I think the offensive line struggled a bit in the beginning of that game against Seattle. Going against Vegas is not going to make things better. It pains me to say this, but I'm taking Vegas this week. I think it's going to be a close game, a competitive game, and I would not be surprised if DC did win. But I'm going to take Vegas, and I'm going to say 23-20, and probably a more traditional score than what we expect of the XFL.
I agree. I mean, you have a quarterback in there, Eric Dungy. For some reason, they didn't dress him. I think he's the most capable quarterback on that team. So
it'll be interesting to see. Travis, what are your thoughts on this game?
I think, and this is not me being biased as a DC Defenders fan, I think this is the most interesting game of the weekend for me, at least, because, I mean, DC was one of the favored people of the North, and if you're looking at my power rankings, this is number 3 taking on number 2. We saw Vegas lose week 1, of course, and, I mean, I think they're going to continue to struggle to run the ball, is Vegas. And I think this DC Defenders defense, we saw them send a lot of pressure late in that game. And if they don't have to worry about the run, I mean, it's going to make their roles on defense a lot easier. Like Michael said, I think Jordan Tiamu, he's a veteran of spring football. I think he's going to settle in. I don't think that's cause for red flags quite yet. And I'm interested to see if they continue to play De'Aaron King as much, or if, once Tiamu settles in, if they, just fully let him have the reins of this offense. It is in Vegas, and they are the betting favorites, but I'm still going to have to pull my slight bias card and go with DC. Even though we struggled against Seattle, I still feel we have a very strong defense, and I think our offense is only improving. So I'm going to go with a score of, let's go with 20-15.
Okay, that definitely seems like more of an XFL score. That's the one thing that's kind of tough about these predictions. With the NFL, you can kind of give an idea, and you'll be in the ballpark because of the way the scores work. With the XFL, you got 1, 2, and 3-point conversions, so you can literally have any combination of numbers. So it's definitely interesting to try and predict these games for sure. But in terms of score, anyway, Chris, I'm sorry, man. I often argue with you when it comes to opinions. I don't mean to. It's just we often disagree, I guess. But DC has the best quarterback room in the league. It's not even close. Maybe next to Vegas would be the only team I put near them, simply because they've got Hundley at the top, and then they got Perez there, who I assume will be the backup at some point, and then they got a very promising young guy in Jalen McClendon behind that. But to me, in a league like this, you draft versatility, which I've talked about multiple times. You go get a guy like Eric Dungy. You go get a guy like De'Aaron King, who can play wide receiver. Dungy can play tight end. You dress all 3 guys, and you rotate them. So, yes, I would agree that they should have dressed Dungy, but that is the only point that I agree on, because I personally think he is the least talented quarterback when it comes to actual passing in this team. I think that Tiamu is actually the most talented passer on the squad. King's a close second. But with that being said, I do think that DC is going to give Vegas every bit of the run for their money this weekend. But I think Vegas, with the home field advantage at Cashman Field, which is going to be rocking, believe it or not, I think they are ultimately going to take this game, and it's going to be like a very close game, much like it was in week 1. Probably comes down to a last-minute play, much like week 1 again. I would see this being like a 21, 22 to 16 game. with Vegas, like I said, basically scoring late to take a victory. Moving on to the San Antonio Brahmas at the Orlando Guardians. Krish, what is your prediction for this game?
San Antonio, the defense is locked down. They got double D's, Deshaun Downey in there. Like, I think he's crazy good. I mean, he's my boy, so I'm going to say that, but he's really, really good. And I think Orlando, I mean, if they run out Paxton Lynch or Quentin Dormady, I like Quentin Dormady. I know this is going to sound crazy, but I like Quentin Dormady more than I like Jordan Tehamu. So I think, I mean, from what I saw, that one jab, he looked like he was, commanding the offense pretty well. So, let's see what we see. But I got San Antonio win this game. If Francois starts, it'll be closer, but I see free money right there. So San Antonio 21 to Orlando 3.
3?
Yeah.
You realize you've predicted every losing team to have single-digit score, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay. All right. I just wanted to throw that out there.
He's expecting a week. He's expecting a week full of blowouts.
Yeah,
apparently.
This game is probably not going to be close. I think it's going to be similar to what we saw with the Orlando game against Houston. I know that Orlando was going to improve at some point in time, and San Antonio is going to be likely the team that they can do it against. I just don't see it yet. I don't know when they'll play again. I don't know when their second game is. But San Antonio will probably end up winning this game pretty handedly at 22-9.
Okay, not all that far off of Krish's prediction there, actually. Travis, what are your thoughts on this game?
This game's really interesting for Orlando's quarterback situation. If I'm Orlando, Paxton Lynch probably is not dressing because I'm dressing DeAndre Francois and Quentin Dormady. For me, I do like Quentin Dormady. I'm going to agree with you, Kish, on that. I do like Quentin Dormady. I don't like him better than Jordan Ta'amu, but I do like him. He did have a very good drive, and then he did end up turning the ball over a couple of times, but I think he's just trying to make a play in a game that they're losing very bad in. So I don't fault his turnovers late in that game. I'd like to see him get the start, and maybe DeAndre Francois comes in, the second half, depending on what the score is. We'll see. But I'd like to see them continue to battle at quarterback. I think hopefully, I'm not going to say he is, but hopefully Jack Cohn settles a little bit more in, and we see a more polished Jack Cohn in week 2. And I think that leads to a San Antonio victory. So I'm going to go with San Antonio 17, Guardians 10.
Okay. I personally think this Orlando home field advantage will be a little bit bigger the deal than everybody's giving them credit for. I do not think Orlando will win the game either. I think San Antonio is going to win this one, but I do think it's going to be a close matchup. I personally think this is going to be something like an 18-15 game. Yet again, probably one on whoever holds the ball last, very similar to a couple games we saw this weekend. But moving on to the next game, the last game of the weekend, 2 Texas teams are taking on each other. Arlington versus Houston. Bob Stoops versus Wade Phillips. It doesn't get any better when it comes to coaching matchups. Krish, what is your thought on this game?
Yeah, I just want to clarify when he says crowd like home field advantage, he means the crowd noise that they're gonna pump in because no one is gonna be there. So anyway, Houston at Arlington, I like Houston, man. I love Drew Pelt. Like I said, I'm high on him. I think he's a lot better than Slaughter. I think he should start. He looked really, really good other than that one turnover, but he's solid out there. Their running game, they need to get Keith Ford more involved. I love Keith Ford. I'm really high on him. I know he had a rough week, but he's a motor. He's a motor back there. So I got Houston winning this game 22-18. And I got Colt McDonald playing and scoring 1 rushing touchdown again.
You said 22-18?
Yes.
Michael, what are your thoughts?
This is a setting the bar early in the XFL season, in my opinion, because with the way Houston looked in week 1, I was definitely a little bit under on them. Brandon Silvers, though, still concerns me a little bit. He had a kind of I don't want to call it a cupcake matchup in week 1, but he had a fairly soft matchup in week 1 with Orlando. If Silvers plays like he did against Orlando, this Houston team is going to be very tough to beat this year. To me, Arlington's still my number 1 in my power rankings, even though they had a very tough matchup with Vegas. But to me, that was 1-2. So when you have the 1-2 matchups, it's always going to be much tougher. Drew Plitt is a guy I really like. I think Sloter's better than Plitt, but I do like Drew Plitt for his upside on this. Arlington's defense was surprising in week 1. I don't know how much of that was Luis Perez, but they're facing a very similar quarterback in Brandon Silvers this week. So if Bob Stoops can get this defense to play at the level that they played against Vegas, Arlington is going to win this game, and it's going to probably be 26-21.
Gotcha. Travis, what are your thoughts?
This one's a really interesting one for me. I mean, I definitely have the Renegades way higher up my power, or not, I guess, way higher up on my rankings, but they are higher. And I think this is a game that if Brandon Silvers still continues to play, I think this is where we see him falter. And like Michael just said, I think he had a bit of a cupcake matchup, and that was a little bit of a fluky game for him. He still turned the ball over multiple times. It's not like he looked perfect. He still turned the ball over multiple times. And Arlington made Luis Perez turn the ball over multiple times. In my opinion, Luis Perez is way better at reading defenses and decision-making than Brandon Silvers. So I still think we see Brandon Silvers turn the ball over multiple times. I still think Cole McDonald should play chunks of this game. I hope he does at least. That's not only because of my fantasy team, but I hope Cole McDonald does slowly get built into the starting role in Houston. And I do really like Drew Plitt. Needs to clean up the turnovers. He did have, I believe, a fumble and an interception. So he does need to clean up the turnovers, but nonetheless, Arlington got a victory week 1, and I think they get a victory this week to go 2-0. So my prediction is going to be Arlington Renegades 25, Houston Roughnecks 18.
Okay, interesting. This is a very interesting game. Like you said, this is one of the tougher ones to predict, in my opinion, because honestly, I don't think that Houston's going to have much of a home field advantage here at all. Arlington's obviously, not a terribly far drive. If you really are a huge Renegades fan, you'll probably go to this game anyway. So very, very interesting thought process here. But I personally am going to go for Houston. I think I really like what they did in week 1. They look like a very tough team. I like how they rotated in Cole McDonald, and he got in there for the read option plays, and they kind of switch up the offense with him in there a little bit. So I really like that aspect to their offense. So I really think that they're going to have too much for the Arlington defense. Donald Payne, if you're watching, I apologize. I don't know what to say, man. I think Houston's going to win this one. 23-18 in this game. So just a quick rundown on how we all did last week, because I'm sure you all are curious, and I didn't bring this up before. Here are our predictions from last week. So correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm probably going to be wrong, but I believe Travis went 4-0, and Michael and the Brish went 3-1, and I went 2-2. So not to say that we're experts by any stretch, but I mean, out of 4 of us, we predicted 4 games incorrectly. So, maybe if you kind of average out our guesses here, you're going to win some money this season. I'm not condoning betting. I'm just saying, take into consideration what we have in mind, because we've been pretty accurate so far.
100%. I mean, I'll just say with my picks, like I'm going 4-0 this week. So, put your kids' lunch money on my picks, and man.
I love it. Put your kids' lunch money on his picks. Probably don't do your kids' lunch money, but I love the confidence. Any final thoughts before we get out of here for the evening?
I'm just saying, Kish, I'm the one who hit the parlay last week, so put some respect on my name.
Love it. Love it.
Great, man. Great show today. Like, thank you for all the support, everyone who's watching. Like, I saw the numbers go up. So keep supporting us. Really appreciate all the support and love. So.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We wouldn't be here if you weren't for you guys tuning in. So if you tuned in tonight, make sure you hit that like button. It helps push this video out to other viewers on YouTube. Essentially, they have to know you like it to recommend it to other people, which kind of makes sense when you think about it like that. So hit that like button for us. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Help us on our growth here and our path to 1,000. We're aiming for June. So if we could get that by the end of the USFL season, that would be glorious. So thank you for all your help. Any other final comments before we get out of here, fellas?
Hopefully another good week of football.
Yeah, exactly. I think you're going to see like the same Orlando team, but other than Orlando, man, all these other teams, 7 out of 8, man, it's going to be a good game. So tune in, watch. I might be wrong, but I know I won't be. So just tune in and keep watching, man.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'll leave you guys with a quick just shout out about what we do here in case you're catching us for the first time.
This is Brett, and you're watching Shady Sports Network. Tune in, hit that like button.
You might wonder, what do these guys do? Player signing announcements. I never in a million years thought you would actually come on to break this news. So without further ado, go ahead and tell everybody what happened today.
Yeah, man. I just had a workout with the Cincinnati Bengals. Signing me right out.
Without further ado, I'd like to announce that, I'll be taking my talents to Salina Liberty.
This just in. The Major League of Football is reportedly collapsing, unable to pay hotel room bills, with players being kicked out of their rooms and hotel managers asking them to leave voluntarily without issue.
And then we got Lions wide receiver Williams is debuting this week as a starter. That's something to look at as far as the eye test goes. And then another one on the eye test is Mostert might be coming back to Miami. And we can see if he has a role in this offense and see if he can be viable for the next couple weeks coming and help us in the playoffs and possibly towards a championship. That would be very nice because he's sitting on my bench right now.